Good morning to everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're listening. This is a presentation about my own experience. Normally, don't like to talk about myself, but in the interest of psychiatry, I've called this the adventures in transforming psychiatry that I went through myself. I enjoyed it. It's an adventure. I really enjoyed every minute of it. I thought I'll share that with all of you. I'm Professor Deva. I'm a senior professor of psychiatry at the University of Parameshvara in Malaysia. This is actually part of a book that I'm writing, about 150, 160 pages, that outlines the same thing, but this is a condensed version of that so that it can be shown in PowerPoint. What struck me a lot was I started out in psychiatry way back in 1970. And what struck me was that there's a lot of gap between what we are teaching in psychiatry, how good it is to know about mental problems, help the mentally ill, and treat them and get them better on their feet, rehabilitate them and so on. But the teaching centers where we're teaching are usually far out of touch with what we're talking about. This is in a high-income country, it's a teaching hospital. There's a locked, windowless room, padded room, called serene room. And it has got a small slit for giving food. This is not the way to treat mentally ill. They're thinking of improving their mental state. It's guaranteed to make them worse. Or in a medium income country, where the ward rounds is done through the grills like this. Patients are locked up. They have access to a window, which is good, but it's grilled and they cannot come out, and the doctors don't go in. They just talk from outside. So I'll give you a sort of introduction, a prelude. I started training in psychiatry in 1970 after graduating in medicine in 1967, internship and a short stint in the army on national service. I learned a lot of things in the army that I never knew before. But I also had chosen psychiatry as my career. When I worked as an intern, I was looking after the prisoners' ward of that general hospital. And I found that mental patients were neglected, had a lot of things to tell me about their lives, their problems, their stresses of life, and so on. I got interested in it. And because it was easier to get a scholarship to train in psychiatry compared to medicine, which is my first choice, I opted for psychiatry. Those days, there was no training program in Malaysia. We had to go overseas. So I started training in a university hospital psychiatric unit, which did not have a normal, forbidding look of a psychiatric ward. It looked like any other ward, any other medical or surgical ward. The only difference was the emergency doors exit to the escape stairs was locked with a key on top of the door, so that in an emergency you could still take the key and open it. Anybody could do it. And entrance and exit to the ward was through a series of 6 lifts. So the lift doors are always closed, so they open briefly. So we didn't have many problems of patients running out of the ward. And it's airy, windows all over, glass windows and glass doors. Look like any other medical ward. That was what impressed me, because when I went to other psychiatric units and hospitals, it was very obvious a psychiatric ward. Barbed wire outside, grills inside, locked doors. The nurses carried a bunch of keys, opening this door and opening that door and opening. My nurses never carried any keys. Compulsory forensic admissions were absent, which was good because we didn't have to admit patients who were compulsory admissions who might escape, and we might be in trouble for that. And judicious early diagnosis in less than 24 hours. close monitoring and use of adequate doses of suitable medicine and ECT were needed for the mainstay of care in some county. At that time, when I first started working there, the average length of stay was 22 days, acute admissions. Even the chronic patients were admitted, usually for discharge within 22 days. In fact, they would be in the ward only for about 10 days, with very quick treatment, adequate treatment, good doses of medicines and other treatment, sometimes ECT. They would be well enough to go on leave, on home leave, within less than 10 days. When they came back from leave, they were usually well enough to be discharged. So the drawbacks of keeping patients in the ward for months and months and weeks was not there. That was a big difference between our ward in the University Hospital in University of Malaya, Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, compared to other psychiatric wards. So which was a big paradigm shift. We also started the day center, where patients completely came from home every day, attend the program. After all the activities are done in the daytime. So all the participant activities, and they went back. So they stayed at home. Family got used to them, did not reject them. And they were able to come to attend our program in the day center for as long as 3 months maximum, and about 1.5 months minimum. Most of them will be there for about a month or more. And some will stay there for about 2 months, 3 months. And during this period, a combination of social, occupational, psychological, and medical treatment was done, very closely monitored and manned by a psychiatrist who does ward rounds at least twice a week, and a medical officer and psychiatric nurses. Occupational therapies, group therapy, sheltered workshop were added, and following are some of the ways psychiatry has gone out of the way or gone out of the beaten path in Lamets. This is the hospital where I worked in, the University of Malaya Medical Center. This is now full of other buildings. It's an old picture. There's another building behind there as well now. A very old picture. And we had group therapy in this large room, which we got from the orthopedic department, which was not using it. We had group therapy 3 days a week. We had all kind of activities, including parties and dancing, and football. I mean, not football, but basketball, volleyball, and so on. And a variety of activities related to craft work and so on. We had cooking. We had a sheltered workshop where we assembled various plastic industry work, and we send them out to the factory or to the airlines every week. And the patients earn money. They're not only mental patients, but they earn money while they were mental patients. And that is in a general hospital, very new modern general hospital. You might think that's exceptional, but in a mental hospital like this, with grills and barbed wire and everything, you don't think anything can be done. No, we did that too. How to transform a large mental hospital in Malaysia. This hospital had 5,000 patients when I visited it in 1971. This was about 65 years old when the adventure began. Occupational therapy had started 30 years ago, but more needed to be done. Patients were involved in making rugs, cleaning the hospital compound, making beautiful basket work. Although the atmosphere of the hospital was like this, and a smaller mental health unit was like this, full of barbed wire, very forbidding. Immediately one would think psychiatry is a dangerous occupation, should not go into it, because patients are all violent and dangerous. So we went there with our postgraduate students to try to change that, do something better. 1977, we actually got a psychiatric ward, which is, of course, a better ward than what we saw earlier. Partitioned it to make it more homely, decorated with minimal cost for about US $200. We gave them curtains, we gave them lockers, gave them property, gave them shoes, gave them combs. Never had a comb in their lives in the mental hospital. Average length of stay was 15 years. Patients just lie down all day like this, doing nothing. No flowers, no nothing. We got them occupational therapists. First time these patients had occupational therapy in the chronic wards. You can see most of them are elderly patients. The younger patients were taken out to play football. No more fear of patients running away. We trust them, they trust us, and it works beautifully. I went to Thailand on one of my visits. I went to a mental hospital. I couldn't believe it. This mental hospital looks like this. It doesn't look like what you saw earlier. You know? Remember what I showed you? It doesn't look like this. So I said, this is a mental hospital? How come it looked like a government office? And the name of the hospital was Garden of Living. This is written here. You can't see it very easily here. Garden of Living. And surely when I went inside, it's the Garden of Living. This is a psychiatric hospital. It looked like a garden. And here was patients sitting there enjoying trees around them, flower beds, decorative plants. I couldn't believe it. I said, why are mental patients being treated differently in Malaysia? So I came back to Malaysia and told my nurses, the nurses in the hospital, where I took my students and said, look, we need to change things. And they said, no, we cannot change it because these patients will eat up the flowers. And these trees, the patient will climb out of the trees and hang themselves, then we'll get into trouble. These, mental patients. I said, but in Thailand, they didn't do it. They said, oh, Thai patients are different, Malaysian patients are different. You can't believe the degree of animosity staff in the psychiatric ward had towards the mental patients. The discrimination, the stigma which the staff had towards the mental patients. That's myself there in the garden just to prove that it's a mental hospital that I visited. We went beyond that. We started the sheltered workshop. We got subcontracts from many factories nearby, light work, medium work, electrical work, assembling tube lights, assembling parts for TV sets, all sorts of things done by psychiatric patients, psychotic patients, patients who have been there in the mental hospital for years, who are thought to be not capable of doing anything. We showed it could be done. I have a strong belief that if you trust the patients trust you. If you trust the staff trust the patients too. And they were surprised that these patients could do industrial work, subcontract work, earn money, and provide goods that were of industrial quality. Mental patients, whom we thought were good for nothing. I started a museum after that to collect all the equipment that was used in the mental hospital, including the locks and the bed boards and all sorts of things, so that our students, these are one of my batch of students I took there, and showed them what a museum and its contents were. It took 25 years before the museum was finally opened. Won't believe it. That's how things move. If there's a will, there's a way. And we finally did it. In Mongolia, which is a socialist country becoming capitalist, the mental services were rather poor because under the socialist system, everything was provided. Now under the capitalist system, everything costs money. So being a herding nation, which looked after cows and horses and goats and sheep and yaks and camels, we used that for rehabilitation. We got our patients to do this work, but they have to live in the community. They can't live in the mental hospital, which is like this. In winter, it's minus 35 degrees. And this is the Great Wall of China separated China from Mongolia. Very developed China, Mongolia, there's nothing. And this is how a rural countryside looks like in Mongolia. So with some doing, we managed to get some money from WHO and from Asian Federation. And we managed to set up a rehabilitation program for the mentally ill. Herding animals, catching horses, camels, craft work, agriculture. In the short summer, we could grow some vegetables, and craft work that patients could sell and make some money. So the useless patients become useful. And then we actually bought some girls with the WHO money in 1999, 25th December. And later on, this has become something like about 20 girls used for rehabilitation. In the winter, not much activities can be done in the rural areas, but in the hospital, we just got a girl colony outside. We could do that because we got electricity from the hospital. But the main thing was they were no longer locked up. They could go out, there's no barrier, and they can do work and they can live in small communities rather than large anonymous hospitals. So this was a very important picture to show you the start of the first girl with the WHO logo there. So we have to think out of the box to make things better for the mental patients, where things have never changed for years. This is in Fiji. We started a postgraduate diploma course with the help of the Fiji University, the Fiji National University, the Ministry of Health, and volunteers from many countries, Australia, India, Malaysia, and Taiwan. And we got training people for the one-year diploma course. It's the Fiji School of Medicine logo, Ministry of Health, Fiji National University, and the Asian Federation of Psychiatric Associations. We started an NGO, the first NGO for the whole of Fiji for mental health, called the Fiji Alliance for Mental Health. We promoted the association as well as activities and awareness raising in different parts of the country. And we started a stress management ward and a stress management clinic away from the mental hospital setting, in a general hospital and in a primary care clinic. In this is the Dean of Medicine in the Minister of Health, Dr. Sharma, and that's myself opening this stress management clinic. In Cook Island, there's no psychiatrist. Patients were either shipped out to New Zealand, they were severely ill, or they were locked up in or chained up in some part of the right from the hospital. They built a psychiatric ward, which never used because no psychiatric nurse ever worked there in that unit. So the psychiatric nurse who came back from New Zealand actually built her own counseling center using donated wood, volunteers, carpentry school, and some little bit of donated money, about 3,000 New Zealand dollars, to build this training center. Stress management center. They started doing a lot of craft work, sold the proceeds at this tourist market, and made enough money to continue the work of the stress management center in Rarotonga. From simple things like shells, because the island country, a lot of shells to make into garlands. This is fans made out of palm leaves, in batik, a lot of batik, to make sarongs or pariu. And the governments of New Zealand and governments of Japan recognized this excellent work, and they donated money for another center in Aitutaki, another respite care center in Rarotonga, and this was built by them, a second building built by volunteers as a sheltered workshop. And this counseling and admin center, which was the original building they started. All this was started by Mariana, uh, who is the lady who started the NGO. It's her with the yellow shirt, and that's myself, my wife, and these are the Rarotongan staff. And this is actually a volunteer from New Zealand who came to run part of the course that they attended. They run these courses. It's very important that I think spread awareness among the staff. You need to run short courses for about a week in all parts of the country, not just in the capital city. So spreading of the information was done by the NGO, remarkable way, very nominal support from the government. The building was run by an NGO, all the services. And now and then they'll get some money from the NGO for running courses, short courses, they'll get some money, or they'll get some money for transport, or they'll get some, and for some time they paid the salary of Mariana because she also worked in the government service looking after mental patients, because they didn't have anybody else. Now back to Malaysia, I came back and I saw that the primary care clinic was like this. 1,600 primary care patients every day. 1,600. So by WHO research, about 20 to 35% of the patients would have significant psychiatric problems. So you see the queue outside, people waiting outside morning. Some of them definitely got psychiatric problems. So we would pick them up mainly for teaching, because I'm teaching in the university, but also give them free service, no charge. And we were doing it inside this building, but there was no space, absolutely no space. So we built at a cost of about 1,800 to 2,000 US dollars, just a container with a roof donated by the clinic. And we started a stress management clinic. And the students helped to start it. And patients were being seen in the stress management clinic like this before the COVID. After COVID, we still continuing till now, not like this. So the big change from seeing patients for psychiatric problems in an open setting like this, in a crowded place that requires help, not like this in a cell. Well, COVID came. We're not going to give up by COVID. So we had to do masking and this, keeping distances, sanitizing the place, putting up the labels again, and everything online. Now here, the student is interviewing the patient with all the distancing and the mask and the sanitizing. But others are watching online. Others are watching online. This is the role play of stress management and counseling being done by 2 different students in 2 different parts of the country in a split screen. And this is the patient. We don't see the patient here because this is a complete online interview and therapy, completely online. This patient is lucky, he's got a computer, he's a graduate. We can't do that for nearly all the patients because very few are computer savvy. A lot of them are elderly patients. They're poor, they don't have a computer, they don't know how to deal with it. We're still working on it, but the online, complete online diagnosis and treatment is some way off. We've also done similar work in other countries. This is in Cambodia. I did a lot of work in Cambodia after the Pol Pot regime collapsed. And also we did work in many other countries. I'll show you some of the pictures. This is the first batch of graduates in 1998 from the post-Pol Pot regime. Psychiatrists trained by the help of Norwegians from University of Oslo and the International Organization for Migration. in 1998. And this is the second batch of trainees. We also set up a day center there, and this is Cambodia. They had a day center before they had the first psychiatric bed after the Pol Pot regime. Very crowded clinic. There are posters there to destigmatize. This is in India. A couple from Australia came back to India to give back to their home country, starting of a day center. I helped them in that. And psychiatry with stress management, yoga, and so on and so forth, in a rural area where there was no psychiatric service at all. So he didn't believe, Dr. Naveen didn't believe in just talking and talking and talking, but he also did it with a considerable contribution by him and his wife. This is the last slide, just to tell you that as long as teachers, places of teaching, methods of teaching, and treatments, psychiatry remains in status quo. Psychiatry. And practice of psychiatry will remain sequestrated, marginalized, and stigmatized. We can hold all the anti-stigma campaigns in the world. It will not change as long as every day new students learn old habits based on absolute stigma. We have to change. We have to have a circuit breaker. We have to break this circle, this vicious circle, by teaching the psychiatrists, trainee doctors, trainee nurses in settings that are not tainted with the stigma of old psychiatry and stigmatization. So the key is really teaching. I asked recently, just a few months ago, I asked friends of mine from highly developed countries, where do you teach your medical students in Europe and in America? Is it in a primary care setting that WHO recommended in 2001? Or in a psychiatric ward? They said quite readily, oh, it's very much in the psychiatric ward, which is still full of psychotic patients most of the time. If that is what you teach students, you expect them to suddenly change their mind and say, I must destigmatize, I must not consider patients as dangerous, that anxiety, depression, and stress are more important. Students learn what you teach. If you teach the wrong things, they will follow the wrong things. We all do it. Many of us are following the bad habits of our parents, the good habits of our parents. The choice is ours. The choice is entirely ours. We can make a difference if we change the teaching practices. As long as there's not change, as long as you take the patient to the mental ward, as long as you take the patient to the mental hospital, as long as you do the ward round from outside the grilled window, nothing will change. We are challenging the intelligence of human beings, of the public, of our students, of our young doctors, by saying, do what I say, but don't do what I do. This is a disgrace. We need to change this. As long as teachers, places of teaching, methods of teaching, and the treatments in psychiatry remain status quo, psychiatry and the practice of psychiatry will remain sequestrated. The summaries above show that cost is not a big issue. Poor training is. Wrong training is. The willingness to think out of the box in difficult and low-resourced, low and medium income countries is far more important than following examples from highly developed countries where they've got all the resources, enormous human resources. Attitude change has to begin with us, psychiatrists and psychiatric nurses and administrators in psychiatry. We need to change. Thank you. Terima kasih. Thank you, Tumas. Gula Binaka, Metaki, and Daya Angadalu.